Ethically Speaking is a podcast of the Institute for Enterprise Ethics at the Daniels College of Business.
Welcome to episode 18 of Ethically Speaking, a podcast from the Institute for Enterprise Ethics at the Daniels College of Business at the University of Denver. The topic for today is dealing with the unintended consequences of artificial intelligence. I'm Dan Sweeney, the director of the Institute for Enterprise Ethics. Artificial intelligence has become more science than fiction in the last 10 years. As the advancement of artificial intelligence continues to explode, one critical element has gone unaddressed: an industry-wide set of ethical standards to govern the growing field. Who should define the ethical standards and protocols for artificial intelligence? How will it be integrated into the zeitgeist ethically and effectively? And who is responsible when AI makes a, quote, wrong, end quote, decision? The Institute hosted a roundtable discussion on this topic recently, led by Bart Alexander. This podcast is based on that roundtable discussion. Bart Alexander is principal of Alexander Associates, LLC, a Denver-based consulting firm, and formerly served as Chief Corporate Responsibility Officer for Molson Coors Brewing Company. He has served in various senior public leadership roles in economic development, employment programs, and health and human services at the federal, state, and local levels. We have posted 3 essays on this issue of artificial intelligence on our website at www.enterpriseethics.org, and reading those would be a good complement to this podcast. So now let's have a chat with Bart. Bart, welcome to Ethically Speaking. This is the 18th podcast we've done in this series, and we're looking forward to chatting with you about dealing with the unintended consequences of artificial intelligence. So let's begin with some very basic questions like, what is artificial intelligence?
Well, thanks, Dan. Glad to be here. I think we all probably first think of artificial intelligence in terms of the robots of science fiction, machines that become lifelike, or even hybrids with us, new life forms. And that, of course, is the direction that artificial intelligence is likely to go. It has already. But there's a lot of artificial intelligence in our everyday life. Automated manufacturing systems, smart kiosks that deliver goods and services to us, autonomous transportation that's being developed both for human transport as well as for transport of goods and trucking. It also includes the systems that almost every business and every community is now using, of crunching big data to find new information, the analytics within those systems. Even ordering a book online triggers a system that suggests what else we may like. It can include nanobots that could be inserted in the human body and make changes to our genetic or physical makeup. Artificial intelligence is pretty much part of almost every system we interact with every day.
Let me ask you this, Bart. It's kind of a semantic question that's been on my mind. Is all artificial intelligence non-human intelligence?
Well, that line may get crossed, and an interesting question is, are machines as smart as we are? But you might also ask, are they as smart as your dog or cat?
So it seemed to me that one of the distinctions between artificial intelligence and non-artificial intelligence has to do with the issue of intuition.
We think of intuition as a very human characteristic, and we tend to think of that as something that is innate to our intelligence, our own systems. But there's some work that a lot of intuition comes out of information that we already have. It's just being processed deeper in the brain than our conscious thinking, and therefore I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that machines may have intuitions that are even better than ours.
So that's good. We've got a good broad definition of artificial intelligence that we can deal with for the rest of this conversation, so let's move on. Bart, over the past at least century or more, the world, and I think especially the Western world, has experienced a huge amount of technological revolution, innovation. What's special about this artificial intelligence? What are some of the characteristics of AI that make it so different, and some would say so dangerous, compared to previous new disruptive technologies?
In many ways, the artificial intelligence revolution is the same as other revolutions that human beings have experienced from the beginning of our species. I mean, at some point someone discovered fire and the world was changed. discovered tools and the world was changed, discovered manufacturing and the Industrial Revolution, the world was changed, discovered computers and the ability to manipulate data and the world was changed. We've been through many of these revolutions, and in each time there's disruptions. People lose jobs, people gain new jobs. Some people's lives are made easier, some people's lives are made redundant, to use the English word for layoffs. What's different this time is the rate of change. If you think about the Industrial Revolution, it went on 100 years plus. There was a lot of time for adjustments. And those adjustments, as difficult as they were able to be accommodated by human systems changes at the same time. I like this quote. It was from Elizabeth Colbert in The New Yorker. She said, "Think of the Industrial Revolution happening in the lifespan of a beagle. Puppy to adult dog, the entire Industrial Revolution happens." That's kind of the speed that this is happening at. And the question just is, how will humans adapt? We also have the potential for new life forms with artificial intelligence, the potential for hybrids between us and machines. And I think there's a huge implication of this, that the normal systems that we use to regulate and control this change aren't going to be able to keep up. Government in particular will not be able to understand what's going on with these system developments, let alone create new regimens for regulation and monitoring. And so I believe that this is going to put a new challenge on industry to develop self-regulatory mechanisms to handle this tremendous rate of change.
It seems to me that one of the characteristics of artificial intelligence is its name, because how can humans deal with something that's non-human in the realm of intellectual, intelligent decision making? It's like turning over your autonomy to a non-human entity and hoping for the best.
Yes, it depends how that entity is governed. What are the values that underlie the algorithms and the decisions that entity is making? Who's made those decisions? Who are the people who have put that into the machine? And if the machine is evolving, what are the rules by which it evolves? That's why I think that industry needs to be very conscious of this and be thinking about the ethical and social considerations up front as these systems are being developed. At the roundtable we just had, we had a student who had just gotten a degree in this field. Mm-hmm. I thought it was a little chilling when I asked him, how have you been trained in your academic work to deal with these ethical considerations that may come up? And his answer was, we're not. That's not something we're dealing with. It tells me that we're going to need more than software engineers and systems design people to be involved in the design of automated systems, and particularly autonomous systems, that we're going to need to have the right humans engaged.
I think it was about a year ago, maybe a little more, when there was an announcement made by, a half a dozen or so of the largest, most important tech companies in the world, including a lot of big iron tech companies like Intel, IBM, Microsoft, but also the Facebooks and the Googles and so on. They were creating some kind of a body under the kind of the tutelage of a Stanford professor to, in fact, do that, try to get out ahead of these ethical issues before the artificiality kind of overtook the intelligence. But I haven't heard about that much lately. Have you followed that at all?
I think that work is continuing, and I think it's been encouraged by some of the realization of how algorithms can be manipulated and used by others in the current debate over Russia's involvement in the U.S. electoral system. Mm-hmm. So I think they've got a lot on their plate. As I looked at putting together the discussion we just had, I thought there were 5 key ethical issues that we needed to address. The first one was the impact on work. A second one was the impact on inequality in society. The third was the transparency of the values that are embedded into these systems. The fourth was, how do we ensure data integrity and security of the systems themselves? And then what are the impacts on human relationships and even the way we define community?
We'll deal with 3 of those 5 issues here shortly. Let's move on to those more specific topics. As we just discussed at the end of that last question, Bart, in the roundtable discussion we had recently, you led a really interesting discussion on the possible risks and opportunities presented by artificial intelligence on a number of very specific dimensions of our lives and what role government regulation may or should play, what role industry self-regulation should play, the role of individual corporate policy making in overseeing AI. Let's take three of these topics and talk about risks, opportunities, and responsibilities. And let's first talk about how artificial intelligence might affect our work lives, our occupations, our professions.
Well, Dan, like any new tech, artificial intelligence will result in location as well as new jobs, and jobs we can't even imagine now. If we just take a look at the past, Ball State estimated that 85% of the manufacturing job losses in the United States are due to automation. And Bloomberg reported that the greatest concentration of this automation, the greatest concentration of robotics, is in the Rust Belt. And in fact, the highest concentration was in my hometown of Toledo, Ohio, which I know is still struggling with huge issues of unemployment and dislocation. Oxford has estimated that in the future, 45% of all jobs will be subject to automation. Automation will increasingly impact technical jobs as well as manufacturing. In fact, anything that's routine, anything that can be put into a pattern, as complex as it may be, can be automated. Many of the new jobs created will require completely different skills, advanced STEM skills that won't be present in the dislocated workforce. Another area that will probably grow is high-touch jobs, jobs like counseling, personal care, jobs that require intimate personal connection. Those jobs will have people moving into them, and they may be seen as higher valued jobs in the future as there's higher competition. Even the School of Engineering here at DU is put together an assistant to work in assisted care facilities for elderly people to work with them. So even some of those high-touch jobs, aspects of which can be automated, are actually going in that direction.
You know, one of the examples I'm very impressed with, and it may be because I spent a few years of my career working for this company, is IBM's Watson. It not only can win a trivia game, but that system's ability to scan huge amounts of information looking for very, very, very specific answers and helping particularly medical care specialists find the most up-to-date way of treating some disease is just, I think, extraordinary.
You know, Dan, that may be a great example of your intuition comment earlier. We thought of particular physicians of having amazing diagnostic capabilities. They just kind of got it. They had the right sense of what it is. Well, what is it that was really going on in their head, and can that be automated? The answer is probably yes for the most part. And probably a computer or Watson having access to every database on every case that's ever occurred in that situation will do a better job of it than even the best diagnosticians.
From at least that kind of an example, I'm very optimistic about the whole thing. But on the other side of that issue, and I forget who I heard say this, but they were talking about when they first went into a career, out of college, or maybe even out of grad school. They went into a career, and they were working for a few months, and then met somebody he hadn't known, and the other fellow said, "So what do you do?" And he said, "I do whatever the job description was." And he said, "That is the first time I felt that I had a new identity, because I had a profession. I did something." One of the things that some people worry about in terms of this artificial intelligence is we could end up with a lot of people who no longer have that identity. And that's, I think, much more serious than just losing a job.
And then whose job is it to try to build a new role? Who's responsible for the retraining of these people, providing them different skills or different roles? Is it that individual, him or herself? I've lost my job to automation. My job is to figure out what's next. Is that something my company should have thought ahead of? Is it my company's job to have planned for my obsolescence and think what else I might do and take care of me? Or is that something that we relegate to government? You asked the question, whose responsibility? I don't think we've even begun to answer that question. And I think it's one that's going to be greater and greater. And you're right, it is not just at the level of access to income. It's at the level of meaning of life.
I think it's a much more seriously compounding issue than it looks like on the surface. I'd like to move on to another issue, but not unrelated to the work issue that we just talked about. How might this artificial intelligence force impact the issue of economic disparity in the level or sense of equality that we may or may not experience in the future? Now, I've felt for some time this is one of the two or three most important issues facing the United States and other Western countries as well. And it seems to me that this artificial intelligence thing may just make it worse.
Dan, it was at another Institute for Enterprise Ethics event where Karen Vettig came in and shared data on the growing inequality across the U.S., the rest of the developing world, and developed world as well, and how much sense of our current societies have been built on a post-World War II growth of equality that is now going in the opposite direction. I think artificial intelligence is going to hasten that development without some sort of significant intervention. We talked about how many jobs are going to be impacted already, and that those jobs will not be just manufacturing or physical labor that will involve routine work in analytics and processing of information across the entire spectrum of employment. Wall Street Journal has reported that as minimum wage hikes are being implemented, it is hastening the automation of those jobs. And MIT has reinforced what we talked about before, that the jobs created by artificial intelligence will require higher education and skills. Now, the good news is artificial intelligence will also make our economy more efficient. And Accenture has said that it could raise annual U.S. GDP growth by 2%. That's huge. There's going to be money created. There's going to be value and wealth created by artificial intelligence. The question you ask is, who gets it? I think underlying this are some other questions. What level of inequality is acceptable in this country or in any country? And maybe behind that, what level of inequality is consistent with social order? There's some people who argue that if we allow inequality to go too far, we will have riots and a breakdown in law and order in our society. And that leads to the question, what level of safety net should be available to displaced workers? If they are even eligible for retraining or capable of being retrained, what happens in the meantime? And who should pay for this? Is that something we as individuals should be saving for ourselves for that eventuality? Is that something our companies should insure us against? Or is that something we're going to ask the social safety net paid by government to take care of? And I think at the top of that question is, should we look at policy initiatives like the guaranteed minimum income that's being tested in some country, or some other means to just wholesale redistribute wealth from those who are gaining by the artificial intelligence revolution?
Who's thinking about these things? Aside from you and me and our friends around the Institute roundtables, who's diving into this stuff?
I know that this debate is active within the traditional social welfare community. The people who do Social Security policy and welfare policy and social insurance policy, as it's called in Europe, are holding seminars on this. But I don't see a huge engagement between those people and the business community, who are both going to have to share in the solution to this.
Well, as often occurs in these kinds of a conversation, you find yourself going down the path of cooperation across a broad number of parties and institutions and organizations and enterprises, and it seems fairly clear to me that that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, this issue, I think it's great that the Institute is having this conversation and putting out this podcast. The conversation needs to be widened for people of goodwill in business and in civil society and in government to start talking about how we're going to manage changes that occur very quickly and not react to them after they've occurred in ways that we may not really appreciate, though. And I think you're right. We need to have more conversations like the Institute has begun here, engaging people from business, the public sector, the nonprofit world, to discuss, how can we anticipate these changes and prepare for them, so we're not dealing with them on the back end as issues of social unrest.
Well, maybe this podcast can provide some of that impetus, and we can encourage our audience to send it along to people of influence they know to help get some progress made on this. Thanks, Bart.
And Dan, don't want to end on just a purely negative note, because there will be new great jobs created. So it's going to be great opportunities for some people. So for young people looking at what is the world going to look like tomorrow, there are going to be some really exciting jobs that we haven't even thought of today.
Finally, Bart, one more issue. What impact do you think artificial intelligence will have on our interpersonal relationships? We know that a lot of AI developers are building more and more human-like traits and responses into their machines. How will this affect the manner in which we interact with them and how they interact with us?
So it's early morning, you really have had a rough night, and Alexa says, time to get up. And you respond, shut up, Alexa. How should Alexa respond? How should machines respond to our moods, our anger, maybe even our abuse? CNN Tech asked that question. I think it's an interesting one. Should machines that we treat poorly turn themselves off and refuse to come back on until we treat them properly?
Like Hal?
And if we don't build that capability into them, will we be grooming ourselves to expect each other to respond equally well as a machine that ignores our abuse? Robots are becoming more social. The Washington Post asked, maybe that's a solution to our screen addictions. But they also concluded it could just be more digital weirdness that we're engaging in our lives. The Daily Mail in the UK asked, should robots have gender? Should they have personalities? And if they do, how will they groom our responses to them, but also to each other? I think one of the interesting issues, Wired's article on love and sex in the time of robots, imagining what could happen to our most intimate relationships if we have an opportunity to engage with machines that may comply with our every desire without any expectation of reciprocity, and how that could really undermine the whole meaning of love and intimacy in our society.
It goes from artificial intelligence to artificial emotion.
And when is it artificial? Don't we all, at some level, choose a particular emotion at times, despite how we really feel, because we think that's more socially appropriate? Why is it different with a robot? I also think there's a question about the rights of robots. The New Yorker asked, if animals have rights, shouldn't robots? At what point do robots have this ability to be citizens with both rights and responsibilities? And if we don't grant them that, are we in fact creating a new regimen of slavery?
I can't say that I've given that question deep thought, but it has passed through my brain now and then. And what I have sort of leaned toward depends if you can assign the robot as having a soul. Now that gets us into a whole different realm, and I'm not sure we have enough recording capacity for that conversation.
Yeah, I think it's the right question.
So do I. Well, Bart, this has been an extremely interesting conversation with you. I'm so glad that you took the time to talk to our listeners. We covered a lot of territory. I wonder if you might have a concluding remark or two.
Well, I do. Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking have each raised the fundamental issue of the risks posed by artificial intelligence to our survival, to the survival of the human species. I think it's hard to dismiss that question, given the qualifications and expertise of these individuals. But we don't even need to go that far to realize that the design of artificial intelligence cannot be left to engineers and system architects alone. We need to put the right humans in the fundamental design processes. And who is that? I think it's ethicists, social scientists, people like those who attend the Institute's programs and who are asking the questions, what could go wrong? And how can we prevent that from happening? I strongly believe that kind of engagement is unlikely to be fostered by government regulation, or the goodwill of companies alone, or the goodwill of individuals, but rather by industry self-regulation that is transparent about the underlying values, and that's adaptable to the changes in technology and societal expectations. That kind of work you talked about before, that the tech companies are beginning, is what has to continue. In the end, we have to figure out, how do you regulate an algorithm that's improving itself? I'm glad the conversation has begun.
So am I, Bart, and I'm glad that you were here to contribute to it. Thank you very much.
Ethically Speaking is a podcast of the Institute for Enterprise Ethics at the Daniels College of Business. College of Business. College of Business. College of Business.